Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Senza Fili Sparring Partners webinar on a new role for mobile operators. Today, Monica Paolini, principal at Senza Fili, will be speaking with Jason Inskeep, director of the 5G Center of Excellence at AT&T. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating the webinar. In Sparring Partners, we watch our debaters discuss a topic live on video and without slides. We would like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation today. Please share your comments and questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address questions as they go along and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So please do not hold your questions until the end. And finally, we'll be live tweeting today's webinar. You can follow along or participate in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Sparring Partners. And with that, I'll hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thank you so much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to Jason about the changes that mobile operators are seeing in the market. I just realized that this is on Veterans Day, so happy Veterans Day. It was not planned. It was just we were trying to find a day that was good for all our other commitments. Anyway, today, so we're talking about the new how are mobile operators changing, and basically, there is a change which is due from the technology side. So there's new technologies, and there is new markets, and the major market is the enterprise. And so it's great to have Jason talk to us because he's been at the forefront of both. So new technologies, enterprises, how do they go together? So it's going to be a great conversation, but I'm going to let Jason to introduce himself. So Jason, welcome to Sparring Partners, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been quite a conversation we've had over the past few years. I think we kind of started talking about this, probably 3 or 4 years ago, maybe in Austin was the first time you and I had met and spoke. So it's been quite a journey along the way. My team now, I started a small team, and there was a small team of us at AT&T about, I guess, almost 5 years ago now. We were thinking about it recently, that started working with our labs folks to really figure out the intersection of business and the technical things that were coming, and go figure it out. And 5 years later, we've learned a lot, right, in terms of what's changing. My peer, he's still on one side, handling one side like we grew up in, and I'm now on the other side, looking at it from the customer lens only. So it's been quite the journey, and long ways to go. It's hard to believe it's already been 5 years working in this space, though, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is really important. It's really a learning process. Nobody knows or knew the answers yet. I mean, and the more you learn, the more questions you're going to have and more you're finding out. So it's a great that you're going to be sharing some of your learning experience here with us today. So to get us started, and again, all of you in the audience, feel free to ask questions as we go along, because there's going to be no Q&A at the end. So your chance is to ask questions as we go along. So Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is that, sort of your high level view of what is changing, and then we can start digging deeper in
Sure.
different directions.
Yeah, I mean, the common attributes that have been talked about by operators, by the industry, by customers themselves, relative to the big five, right? 2 of which of those are table stakes, right? Higher bandwidth and more capacity, that's table stakes. And that involves densification, more spectrum that comes with it. Then we got the ultra low latency, ultra reliabilities, right? And there's a network version of that that's going to help improve, say, latency from the device to the tower, air interface side. But the edge is going to have to play into that to get to this end-to-end sort of topology, right? So the combination of network and application gets us to the nirvana that an enterprise is looking for, like the best KPI possible. And then also you've got, massive IoT. And, what does that mean in a double click, which is, now the control plane and the scheduler can handle up to 1 million per square kilometer, so per radio. So plenty of capacity growth available in terms of number of devices, which obviously that's got to be balanced with the actual type of data that's going to be sent through, right? So you got this, you're starting to see this trend of balancing act, right? What can network do versus what can the application do as a combined entity? But what really happened when you look at this construct, and we kind of, I don't guess we realized it until probably about a year ago, we started looking back and said, okay, those are the attributes, but what makes them possible, right? To get to a step change iteration. Otherwise, we're just taking the 3G to 4G kind of move, right? What's going to create the step change? And what we found was there was 3 common things that started in late LTE. Number one, you had the advent of new spectrum options, new spectrum types, right? Very popular, CBRS, right? Creates opportunities that we didn't have before from an enterprise perspective and from a scale perspective, right? Both from an operator lens to use for, say, carrier ag up to, fixed wireless down to private cellular options, right? So that's the first thing. And spectrum, I think, has been, for those in the industry, not underappreciated, but for those everywhere else, it's kind of an underappreciated asset, not just, licensed spectrum or shared spectrum as CBRS is, but also Wi-Fi, right? That's going to be key as we continue to move forward. The other thing that changed in late LTE was to virtualize the core, the cellular packet core, right? That used to be big monolithic beasts that, were racks and racks of space. And, working together with the OEMs and through our journey of an SDN journey of getting to, virtualizing our core infrastructure, we were able to do that with our partners, disaggregate the core as well, meaning now I can move those piece parts around inside of that core to where they're needed and why they're needed, right? So again, the idea of our network is how quickly can I get you to your network? That's the kind of mantra we kept practicing as we went through it. Forget the Wi-Fi versus cellular or cellular versus 5G or whatever. How quickly can I get you your data? So that created the opportunity on the SDN side. So I got Spectrum, I got SDN, those 2 changes, which led to the probably the biggest opportunity we have, which is the opportunity for convergence, right? So network and application start to shake hands, work together. One informs the other. That's at a technical level. But what we've also found coming through that is it's a new skill set, right? It's a new kind of user, right? You've got wireline meeting wireless, cloud meeting cellular network. And, if you think about it, the network person was one type of persona, the software person was another. Both of them got to come a little bit to the middle to get where we want to go. And again, those are the big 3 we send, the SDN, spectrum changes, and of course, convergence are the biggest, I think, learnings and opportunities that give us hope for the enterprise in terms of new ways to do business as we move forward.
Yeah, and those are really enablers because so on one hand you have all these new technologies that are going to be helpful, but if you don't have anybody in the enterprise that cares about them, what's the point? It's
Sure.
But but at the same time, if you cannot meet the requirements of the enterprise, it doesn't matter if there is demand. So it's the fact that the 2 are coming together at a point where wireless becomes more important for the enterprise. And you have the tools to address that. So I think that this is really crucial, and that's what really is new, is the fact that you have the 2 together. And because we had the concept, those are the concepts that we had before too, but just we couldn't either use them or there was no demand.
Oh, yeah.
So
the cost is so outrageous, right? That it was just hard to do.
Yeah. And I have to say that, when you look at it, for all the great things about all these new technologies, it's really the enterprise that is a major beneficiary. So yes, users benefit too, but it's more incremental. So yeah, you get better video, but you got video before. For the enterprise, it's really it's a kind of an all or none. It's really a step change. So yeah, absolutely. Now, before we go, I saw that there is a question from Jose Frauendorf, and hi, Jose, nice to see you here, about the term mobile operator. And this is like a very good introductory question. And the question is, do you think the mobile operator, is the term still valid? And I would say, even the mobile part, because to some extent is mobile and fixed. So is this kind of like the sort of the old way to talk about it? or like even cellular? I mean, like, is there a
you hit it one of those funny things for me, which is the enterprise cares about the end to end, right? They care about the end experience. They want to understand and have as much management versus cost of the packet journey, because that allows them to influence the experience as much as possible, both from a network and application perspective. As you start to think about that, it's important that you're looking at the network in its entirety, inclusive of the cloud and things it touches on the other side, versus just the cloud. Like over the top is still there. It's not going anywhere. We're getting great experiences out of it. To your point, the end user from a consumer perspective, they're getting incremental step change, but we as humans are so greedy, we never notice the change, right? We just say, oh, look, my video, it's great, it was working, right? But I didn't necessarily know it was coming or not, right? It's just there, right? Enterprises now with these new opportunities can really reshape and rethink how they look at it. And, for the way we try to think about it is assumption one, you need connectivity. It's like the air you breathe. It's the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, right? I want to make it simple for you. So regardless, so once you know that, next level in that hierarchy becomes security, right? All right, am I getting the right framework to hand the packet from the network to the application, which is your self-actualization and use case layer, right? And we want to build foundationally and think about it that way, so that whether it's a manufacturer or whether it's a city, the underlying construct can be similar, with the actors and actresses and their roles and responsibilities changing as you move up the stack. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, it's like connectivity, security. Those are not really technology terms. It's not network slicing, 5G, or even CBRS or something like that. So when you go and talk to the enterprise, how much are you going to be talking about the sort of the services that you like, connectivity, security, versus the technology? Isn't it a little bit difficult, because it's not like when you go when you look at your network, you look at the technology, but when you present the case to the enterprise, it's about the benefits of the technology.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
Part of it still is customers are curious, right? Because they hear a lot about what is 5G. And of course, I don't know that we do well enough from a marketing perspective in the regular press for an enterprise to really understand the depth and opportunities that are coming with it, right? And it's hard, right? There's so many pieces to this big complex kind of framework, right? So when we start in with the customer, it's really, hey, this is the current state to the prior G. This is what it looked like, right? And these are the things that are changing. Right. So as those things are beginning to change, we're showing how the puzzle pieces are moving around and where the interactions are now new opportunities. Right. Inside of that, the gift and the curse word that I've heard or lived with for 5 years is use case. Right. And I think we a lot of times we get mixed up between technology and process. Right. Technology is the tool, process is the use case. Right. And is it a 5G use case? No, it's just a use case. Right. And you can solve that in a myriad of ways. What we try to figure out and work with the customer on is if you do it with X, because again, we're the network operator, so we have network from end to end. So if you do it this way, your trade-off is this. If you do it this way, your trade-off is that. Again, making it a flatter kind of topology, working back, and the way I look at it from again, that dangerous word is use case. There are 0, 5, 10s, right? The 0 use case is command, control, collaboration, and collection. And that's data collection. That's the 4 C's. That's your day 0 stuff. Can't do anything on top of network. Those are your building blocks, right? Then you get into this 5 range, which is kind of I'm just changing part of it, right? I'm changing maybe the network on the robot, so jitter is less, and the robot can now stop faster than it could before, right? Safety and security, right? It builds on the sensors from that command and control collection scenario. Then you get to 10, which are these, Nirvana use cases, right? The digital twin with remote XR as you're moving across the city, and you're Tony Stark throwing things around all over the place, right? You're starting to build toward that, but you need 0 and 5 to get there, right? So it's a journey, and we're really kind of help them journey versus getting them in the, certain specific tools, right? Because that can, put you on a path that is, it's okay. We want to look at flattening it for them from a KPI perspective, so they can look at it foundationally and then begin to rinse and repeat from a technology and use case perspective.
Yeah, and I think that you're talking about something that it's been sort of a good thing and a bad thing, in the sense that, as you say, use cases is just when you start talking about use cases, it's good and bad. It's a kind of like, what is it we're talking about? And most of the attention is like these URLC use cases, so kind of like the sexy stuff, robots, like, which is great, is great stuff, but it's actually a very small part of the opportunity. And it's not necessarily something we have today. So how do you manage that with the fact that, right now what we need to do is a lot of the stuff that it's kind of the boring stuff, like, the basic, the foundation. Right? And this is really essential to get to the other point. So how do you manage from an operator point of view? It's okay, you go to the enterprise and say, yeah, you want to have robots and whatever, but hold on your horses. I mean, we need to get the basics first.
Well, even I'll say that the short answer is very carefully, but the longer answer gets into, some of them have robots. I mean, you got different journeys at each one of these types of facilities, right? The difference and the delta that you're helping the customer understand is, what can you do with the new tech? And a lot of times it has less to do with KPI X is better than KPI Y, right? Because if I spend enough money, I can make any network do what the cellular network does, right? If I want to spend the capital. So you almost have to look at it in terms of not just the tech, right? And the technical fail fast. If you think about the innovation sprint, you've got to look at the operational fail fast. What does it look like holistically? How does it scale from one site to 2 sites to 3 sites? And what does that mean, TCO and total value at scale, right? And that's a change, right? So it's a journey that's being undertaken. The ecosystem is becoming much more important as we continue to roll this thing out as well.
So from sort of the AT&T, or more generally the operator point of view, how is it you have to do things differently in order to address this? This is an entirely new kind of environment. How are you changing to address this, this opportunity?
So you heard me before mention convergence, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a technical convergence, right? You know about our partnerships with the likes of Microsoft, Google, and the OEMs, the Nokias, the Ericssons, and those partnerships that we have existing, right? And they've been there, but now, they're coming together more converged, right? And the same, companies that are partners could also be competitors in this new world, right? So, from that perspective, it's important that the ecosystem keeps evolving, that we keep looking at, how and mind our swim lanes. And from a, change perspective, in this convergence, we've got to come a little bit to what the cloud provider does, right? We've got to operate a little bit more like they think, right? How they work, which is, for a network person, they live in zeros and ones, right? There's a route here and a route there, and, it's X and Y, and there's black and white, right? Software world can be a little more UX, UI, a little more gray. And those are two mentalities that at a big company level, they're coming together. At a tactical level, the mentalities are shifting as well. And it's quite intriguing seeing it, the different, you've got a network person, them thinking in software terms and vice versa, right? And you're seeing that you've got technical, you got company ecosystem convergence, and you're down to the person convergence, right? And you're seeing a shift in skill sets that's being gently nudged by the tech and the user experience demand that's underway.
Yeah, and I actually saw at some point that even within AT&T, you're trying to get people to basically expand their knowledge, so that because it's not something trivial, especially for somebody that's been doing this for a long time. It's not just the technology has changed; it's the way you use the technology that's changed. So you need, people have to change. That's a culture that has to change as well. So that that is interesting. So, and how do you reach for the enterprise? Because that's the other thing, is that users, subscribers like us, it's many of us, but we're pretty much all the same, if I can say that. When you get to enterprise, there's big, small, different verticals. Everybody has different. So how do you manage that?
So if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, I'd have looked at you with a dead stare, right? I wouldn't have had an answer for you, right? What we've kind of figured out through our engagements and through the deals that we've sold, we've got a pretty robust, private cellular suite, right? And it's got a number of different solutions that can stand on their own or be merged together and, affectionately might call it the Voltron move, right? Put them all together and let them build together, right? But, what we take out of that is we look at it from a site type, user type, data type perspective, right? Take case in point, outdoor, heavy industrial, refining type environment, cost per square. And we're looking at it from a network perspective. Remember, that's where we come from. That's our swim lane. That's our where we live, right? When you look at that against wireless alternatives, right, or wired network alternatives, so far we've seen cellular be most compelling from a TCO perspective, right? And that's TCO, not just the network, but as all those other things come in. As you move across this paradigm into, say, an indoor manufacturing, the space shrinks, meaning that advantage of powerful spectrum gets less because of, safety of RF and everything. And then, of course, as you move but in both of those environments, the data owner is also the data creator, which, again, there's your universal theme, right? Is who owns the data and where is it created, right? It's in their fence line. They own it. They create it. Which network makes the most sense with a C and an S, right? Now jump to the manufacturing case. That cost deltas get tighter because of the roof for us. And then I start moving into the grayer area conversations, right? Which get into first one you see is hospital, right? Now they have a bigger data, need or data control need because of HIPAA and all the medical type of engagements. Conversely, you look at retail, right? They want the customer. Well, the customer isn't just one SIM card. That's everybody. So they've got to think maybe Wi-Fi is their lead, even if the cost per square foot is better in an alternative technology. Then you use the same paradigm. You get to airports, and it's a bigger construct of the retail store, but there's a lot of industrial things running around as well. Oh, by the way, take the fence line away, and now you got a city. Construct works the same across in terms of balancing act of how we go deploy and how the conversation flows. So instead of talking in use case, you're talking in generalities of the space. Inside this space, you have roles and actors that are consumer. They don't own the data, so how do we work with them? Wi-Fi helps, but cellular would too. It's a refinery, aka they own all the data, they create the data, they can dictate how you operate and what network you're on because it's safety, right? So therefore, they buy the network that makes the most sense for them to do so. So we're starting to see that sort of trend. Now we start thinking in terms of how do we merge that with that logical next step of managing and moving through use case deployments beyond those 4 C's that we talked about before.
Yeah, but at the same time, so there's a lot of commonality. So even if you go from, say, an airport to a mine, which is completely different environments, but to some extent the technology is the same, and but at the same time you also need to have vertical specific knowledge. So
yeah.
So how do you do? Do you have different groups that address different verticals, or it's because it's really
well,
complicated.
you've got two. Well, you're right. The first thing is it is common at the network level, right? There's a lot of commonality at the network level. When you look at verticals, it's good to have a vertical team, especially as you start to move up the use case stack, right? Or as you look to gain credibility to go outside of just the network piece. I'm a network and cloud kind of person. That's my background. That's where I came from. So I go horizontal and let them tell me the vertical from a customer lens. Hey, here's what I do. Meet me in the middle, right? They know their business better than I do. And even if we have specialties in a certain vertical, unless that person came from that company, they're not going to know that, especially when you're looking at these industrial sites. You may have some terminology that's similar, but every site has a different care of KPI and, entrance, exit need, blah, 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 blah. My network's constant, meaning I can have the same horizontal conversation and get in. Now, to your point, we do have vertical teams that can come at it who worked in industry and can come at it from a different lens, right? For me, I'm coming at it from the lens I know, which is network up with a cloud sprinkling from prior backgrounds.
Yeah. So another thing that when you go and talk to the enterprise, They might, especially in the US with CBRS, they might say, okay, we want to work with you, with AT&T or another operator, or they can say, well, we just want to have our own network. We just want to own it. But at the same time, you can manage it for them, or they can say, we just don't want to have anything to deal with any operator. We just want to be completely independent. How do you see that going? And what does it mean for the sort of like your long-term relationship with the enterprise?
It's an interesting dynamic, right? I mean, it's part of the entire change. I mentioned new spectrum options. It's giving customers the opportunity to look at things different than they had before, right? Same back to that. So they're starting to make the conversation of, especially in office locations, right? I think you may see more of opportunities around less neutral host DAS, maybe more neutral host spectrum, if that makes sense, right? So that you're not bringing the heavy kind of infrastructure that you did before at certain size site types, right? Again, this gets back to a site typing exercise. If you're looking at multi-campus, multi-building, thousands of people or a couple thousand people, that may not be enough capacity, right? It all comes down to spectrum at the end of the day, right? How do you get the most spectrum in? Obviously, in the more blue-collar industrial environments, they're going to need as much capacity as you can get them. In those worlds, it's give them Wi-Fi, give them cellular, give them low, mid, and high band, and they know what to do with it, right? They'll go figure that out. Right. As you get into the more white-collar cube space, right? Different kind of paradigm. And now with things going with COVID and more working from home, we've also got to think about how we reshift and look at opportunities to make the home office similar to the small business office, right? Which could be cellular, could be broadband, should be a combination of both, right? But at the end of the day, the first place we start with in that conversation is spectrum, right? And what does that mean in context of the site type? And you kind of heard me going that way. We got the industrials, we got the big sites, we got small sites, and once you do that, then you can look at the people that inside them. And the good news is now we've kind of figured out how to make all of them harmonize inside of this with the experience. We still got a long way to go. It's still a nascent area and still a growing area, but the path looks really well from how this can help the enterprise for sure.
Yeah, but is the enterprise? Do you think that they will just? I guess how important is to have a mobile operator involved into that? I mean, can they just say, well, we just want to be our own world. We just do it ourselves. I mean, clearly that's a big challenge because it's not, even with CBRS.
Spectrum alone is.
Yeah, but even if you use CBRS or unlicensed, which is easier, in the sense that you don't need a license, it's still there's a complexity in the network. It's still not a Wi-Fi network, and even Wi-Fi networks, a lot of enterprises do not.
They're hard to run too. They're not easy either. So.
Well, and in the same way that they don't run their own water, electricity, and whatever, right? I mean, it's nothing particularly different. But do you see that mobile operators will have a central role in providing this, or would they just go and either do it themselves or have somebody else do it for them?
In the wireless space, the finite resource that even if we have enough right now, we don't have enough tomorrow, air quotes, right? The spectrum, right? CBRS offers a great opportunity, especially when you start looking at your 4 C's, command, control, collection and collaboration, right? It's a great tool for that. One site type of look, and it's got opportunities to scale. But as those as more, and it's a shared spectrum, and that's part of the education that we work on is to say, as more and more people come onto this, that finite resource is going to get diminished, right? So yes, there are options for you to go manage this and do it yourself, and we're looking at, okay, we know what's coming because we built networks for a long time, cellular networks for a long time, and we know that the finite resource is capacity and spectrum, right? So we're trying to work on ways for that customer that does want to say, hey, we don't want the operator. Get it, totally get it, right? They're going to take the stance, and we're saying, hey, here's how we can help you when that capacity need happens, right? In terms of still letting you operate it, but giving you ways to augment it. Some customers are looking at the other way, like, hey, you are the person that has built networks for 20 plus years. Hey, help us do this, right? Because wherever their head's at, right? So you're seeing a mix, right? I think what you're ultimately seeing in any of these situations is a big education hunger, right? In terms of, just like you talked about, the complexity. It's pretty cookie cutter how it looks. It looks the same as our macro network. It's just you change the spectrum and you may have changed where the core is, but those deltas between central core, local core, distributed user plane, layer 3 versus layer 2, that, the wireless people are like, oh, well, what does that mean? What plays into your KPI, plays into your cost, right? And those are the kind of things that we, I think, are obligated as an operator to help share back as a customer goes from one site to two sites, to devices moving between sites, to I want to take this to the next country. Right? What do all these different things look like inside of that decision matrix so that they can get to, affectionately, I think about Goldilocks, right? How do I get to just right? And one site's easy, one lab is easy. As you start adding more and more, there's a lot of considerations, and the customers that are really jumping into it are really digging into those functions.
Yes, absolutely. And especially because, an enterprise might have its own locations, but then they need connectivity throughout. And so, or they might need connectivity in their partners' locations, because everything is interconnected. So it's not like you need connectivity in your office or in the lobby. It's just throughout. And that is the kind of thing, that kind of integration, so the convergence of multiple technologies, multiple apps. I mean, you're just like, it's a matrix where there's so many levels interconnected that
there's so many different things you got to think about.
Yeah, and that's where, can they do it on their own? Okay, so we have another question that I think it sort of fits in what we're talking about, and this is from Mark Kelly. Hello, Mark, and it's great because at Sparring Partners is a lot of friends show up, so that's great. So the question is, will additional indoor 5G mid-band be required in this decade to fulfill the requirements from the enterprise? Outside in propagation in the mid-band is more challenging. Now, I would also like to sort of, maybe we can go a little bit wider here in the sense of talk about how this works in terms of indoor coverage. Because as an operator, to do indoor coverage as part of your public network is, we know it's really expensive. You can't just go and put indoor equipment everywhere, but the enterprise can. So maybe you can talk a little bit about all of this. And
I think, and I'm going to keep the question up in front of me so I can make sure I don't miss the question for your question on top from Mark.
Okay.
Regardless of what kind of network you want to put inside your building, you need radios, right? Outside in is it's going to be challenging to get it inside your building and get the coverage you want. And, maybe more importantly, when you're looking at a factory type environment or industrial type environment, I suspect paying that level of OpEx per sim and the type of data streams that they want from a factory, I don't know that they may not want to send it over to macro network. Now, as we've kind of looked at it, we've taken some paths to give, indoor coverage treated as a local private network, right? So customers can take that traffic off before it leaves the domain. It changes the OpEx structure. And now you're back to, hey, if you want wireless access, just like Wi-Fi, just like anything else, you need radios, right? There are multiple ways to do it. Now we've done some sites that have, bigger outdoors. I'm basically just deploying a macro, right? And I'm giving the customer routing control at the premise, right? We have other sites that are more indoor locations, and they can be indoor and outdoor. Maybe the outdoor feeds the indoor because I've moved the radio so close that the power now penetrates, where before it may have been a couple miles away. Now it's, within a range that it gets inside. Right? Again, still localizing that data to keep it secure. You in your question, and then if I get an indoor kind of location, will more 5G mid-band be required to fulfill? We'll take more spectrum if we can get it, right? I think we need more spectrum, and any whether it's licensed, shared, or unlicensed, for the types of activities that are being requested. Yeah, we need more spectrum. So I think, whether it's now or 10 years from now, we need better ways to utilize it, scale it, as well as make sure we can deploy it, right? And I think the enterprise, in terms of how they may want to reshape how they look at things, because what we do see is when you get into shared and licensed type concepts, Yes, it carries a little more cost per radio, but it has more coverage per square foot, right? In terms of how much distance can it cover inside that facility, meaning it may take one radio versus 10 to cover the same amount of space. And that's important when you're thinking about square footage, when you're thinking about devices moving around and keeping those, those handoffs happening inside. So, again, from an indoor perspective, yes, you still need radios, right? A little more challenging to install shared spectrum and licensed spectrum, but you get more coverage per square foot, especially the more higher the ceiling and bigger the outdoor space is with it, you'll find the ROIs turn. Outside in, for a factory setting, yeah, it's very challenging. And your control goes down very fast, especially when your outside in is in a network that you didn't build. All that said, right, what we've tried to do in the past when we built the DAS, we built it the way we wanted and we walked away. Or we built indoor coverage the way we wanted and walked away. We've taken more of and I think this is not just us, it's pretty much industry wide, I would think. We're now taking more of tell us where you want it, starting with that sub-6 or blanket layer, right, which will include low band and mid band spectrum, right? Give me the coverage, fill the holes, right? And then you have millimeter wave and alternate spectrums that can be, pointed at certain locations for higher bandwidth. Doesn't say get rid of Wi-Fi. That doesn't say not use CBRS. Augment it all, right? I wouldn't say put it all on the same radio, but augment it all. Bring it all to common aggregation points. And again, you may not need it today, but the trend hasn't slowed down in terms of number of devices and things coming on the network. So, as much opportunity as you can, as much spectrum we can get, and it'll play into the cost factors either now or down the road for sure.
Now, when you think about indoor coverage, you mentioned millimeter wave. Now, if you were to be able to use millimeter wave, you don't need much of a new spectrum allocation. It's actually a good thing because it's licensed spectrum, but the reuse is so high that if you really need a lot of capacity,
it depends on your architecture, though, right? I mean, you don't have to necessarily own the spectrum, and you see that with CBRS. You don't own it, you get to use it, right? And others can use it too. We're in our approach with MEC's been thrown around with so many different names, but we basically allow our licensed spectrum to be rerouted into the local network, right? So in that case, you're not, that architecture is hub and spoke, right? The other architecture is on an island, and then you have these combined architectures that come with it. The idea is to give as much control and as much spectrum as possible.
Yeah. So if you look at some enterprises, let's say, for instance, airports, this is something that I've been recently working more, and it's a perfect case because you can have any application in an airport that works. So it's like, from an enterprise point of view, it's like your ideal, right? Yeah, it's just like, but it's also a place where you guys are already, you need to serve your subscribers, and it's a lot of them, and everybody in an airport has a cell phone. They're just doing something with their phone, pretty much. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that you put whatever licensed spectrum you have, sub-6 spectrum, you're probably going to use it all. So how can you, in a situation like this, how can you help the airport get the connectivity that it needs, and they need a lot of capacity, and at the same time without disrupting your subscribers' access and services?
Well, I think you get a couple of things that that we're kind of theorizing on in terms of, again, back to the routing change, right? If I can give the airport control of the quote unquote cellular edge, right, letting them kind of turn that part of that cellular network into a business local network, right? Get the traffic to the airlines faster, right? Which will cut down on maybe building a whole new network out in the public space. Second thing, you get a network slicing. As you move into 5G, standalone, right? You'll have network slicing come online. So now there can be a static maybe slice for the airline at that baseband, potentially, if you go down that far, right? So that, the capacity isn't hurting everybody back in big macro, but at least in that confined space, they have dedicated, highways or airstrips for each, airline or need, again, to give some dedicated capacity. And then I think, to help with the stakeholder, because again, the airline wants to help both the people flying and they want to help their airline and others, give them some control of the routing construct so they can make some of that themselves, right? And I think the first piece, Obviously, we have kind of there with MEC, which would allow them to keep the traffic local. That's created on today just our kind of normal SIMs, but we've also got FirstNet running around there, which is obviously a big deal when you look at airports, right? In terms of first responders, priority, and preemption. So we've got all these things that are necessary because we've got airport or airlines that move from gate to gate to airport. They need that ubiquity. We think there's a means by which, both from a slice perspective for at-prem capacity, we think Edge allows the airport to have some ideas and control to not only just route but monetize, right, and look at things differently. So there's a lot of different opportunities that begin to reshape as we reshape how we look at the plans and the scopes going forward in terms of new architecture opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in this case, how is network slicing going to be, how important is going to be? Because clearly that seems like it's a huge thing, but you can also see that some sort of like a type of net neutrality type of perspective is that people say, well, if you give all the good slices to the airport, what does it mean for the for the passengers? I mean, does it mean that they don't have enough bandwidth? I mean,
I think you got to be careful. You got to be really careful in terms of how much you slice up, right? In terms of how you carve it out. Because to your point, right, once you slice it for someone, you've taken it away from everybody else, right? So you've got to be careful, because again, we don't want to jeopardize one for the other, right? We want to make sure everybody's got a good thing. But some work streams and some business streams require and need more dedication, right, in terms of how they scale. I think the first thing you see is in slicing that makes it a little harder in terms of that question you asked, which is static slices, right? I'm going to set up slices for an industry. I'm going to set up slices for IoT. I'm going to do things, and maybe it's more general, right, in terms of that slice, and it's there, and you spin it up and you turn it on and you get access to it. So it's like our HOV lanes today, where you jump in it and you're with everybody else that has the similar 3 or 4 people in your car, right? But then I think what gets really interesting back to convergence again is dynamic allocation based on policy and rules for different user groups and so forth, right?
So yeah.
And as you see those begin to take shape, right, you will, have the network inform the app inform the network. Hey, I need a slice for 10 minutes because of a key loading event at the airport, whatever, right? And I think those kind of things just show the opportunities available from a conversion perspective.
Yeah, and I guess because it's a dynamic thing, so you can keep changing based on the whatever is the need at the moment. So
and that parameter could be for guests at the airport, right? I mean, it doesn't just have to be for business uses, potentially, right? Depending on how that shapes out, right? And that's still a moving target in terms of what the exact parameters, and hopefully, as things continue to forward, we'll solidify it. But we're just on the cusp of network slicing, though. Just on the cusp.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess that again, in terms of serving the enterprise, if you're using public network, it's going to be really useful in terms of allocating the resources, which right now it's done on first come first serve, like whatever. And so, but in how important is network slicing if you have a private network that is basically only used by the enterprise? So let's say mine that is like sitting out, there's no
Yeah, I think for a mine that hasn't deployed, or for anyone that hasn't deployed a private cellular network yet, they're going to get initial step change in their KPIs just from. And I'm not saying maybe it's the KPI in terms of the performance may be similar, but the total package, they're going to see some step change right away, right, in terms of differences in operating model, in terms of cost per square foot, things that we kind of talked about before. But they're going to, we're humans, we're greedy. Enterprises are going to take what they can from that. Then they're going to say, I need more, right? And that's where slicing comes in on that private core, right? Or in that kind of, hybrid kind of model, right? Is now they, just like you're talking about, they're the owner of that campus. They have, instead of airlines that they're working with, they have autonomous that needs guaranteed throughput, bandwidth, and latency. So that's going to get a slice. And then all the sensors are going to get a different slice. And then the push-to-talk network maybe gets just the standard what's left, because it doesn't need a lot, right? And if the latency is a little high on that, who cares, right? It's a couple milliseconds. Yes, so yes, you're going to see slicing, but it's going to be, I think they're going to suck the step change out of the first step, and then now allocate resources to, say, use cases that start at 5 and go to 10. If that makes sense, going back to that 0, 5, 10 kind of mantra.
Yeah, and then again, you need to have multiple applications, well, or use cases that have to coexist, and it's actually very helpful that they can coexist, but they need to coexist in a proper way so that
Sure,
you use the resources in a very efficient way. So, and that depends on the applications. Now, what's the role of APIs in all this? I mean, and your role in helping out
huge.
this whole. So yeah, it's like
It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. So because you're not just, again, it's not just managing the network, the base, the access. It's becoming much more. It's an end-to-end proposition.
It has to be intelligent. It has to flex, live and breathe, right, in terms of resource demand, resource needs, and sharing as best as possible, and going under the assumption that spectrum is the finite resource. So how do we protect it? Even if we have enough right now, assume the hockey stick hasn't slowed down, it's going to continue. So take all of those precautions to operate. One of the ways that, two ways you can look at it is identify as much as possible, right? Densification, if you think about it, right, the best connection you can get is I plug my device into a wire. Obviously, that kind of defeats the purpose of mobile. So the next thing is how many radios per person can I set up? But alternatively, other ways I can help protect the spectrum is using it through the API, right, and protect the bandwidth through the API, right, or even the experience. And the one that always pops the head for me is when you think about kind of the nomadic use case, right? The ambulance is the one that popped to my head now. They're going to go to an event, they're going to triage the event, but they may be in a rural area, right? The network is likely to have a low to mid-band spectrum only option. Maybe it's all low. So it's important at that state, just a general thing, for the network to inform the application, hey, you don't have a lot of bandwidth right now. Maybe send alphanumeric instead of sending that big video file. And oh, by the way, it gets closer to the hospital, it hits millimeter wave. Now it's got a pipe, right? Start sending pictures back, start sending imagery back. Hey, network's got to let the other know. And some people ask, like, what's the millimeter wave use case? Like, everything. If you give me millimeter wave everywhere, I take it. But the proposition's hard because it doesn't travel as far, penetrate as well from a cost perspective. And plus, am I going to use millimeter wave everywhere? Probably not. But if I could have it, I would take it. You know what I mean? But if you're not going to have it, it would be great if there's an informed application. And that's just one way the API could work. Another way, we talked about slicing, right? Different parameters, pick up a slice and do it. The other way we look at, think about the nomadic user. If you got a truck that's going from hub to hub to hub, right? It'll need certain things inside the four walls. It'll need certain things outside the campus, right? How do you make that app experience harmonize with the network? And that's going to give us even more runway from an experience perspective, figuring that out. And it's the question that's being asked when you look at connected car and all of these things as well. So it's, again, help us help you in the process, and it starts with APIs. And what is the right set to make available?
Yeah, and I guess it's, you look at it, I think you point out something that is very important, that it's not just the network trying to adapt to whatever the requirements are, that because, the network is what it is, but you need to also adapt what is that you need to do based on the network availability. So it's a two-way road. It's not just we have to do it because the resources that you have at any given time, you can increase the resources, but whatever you have at a given time, it's fixed. You can't change it. But what you can change is how the applications run on the network to make sure.
Well, and if you've got it, and we've got mounds and mounds of historical data based on location and radio historical parameters that maybe I'm not doing a real-time feed, but the historical parameters can feed that in an even lower kind of time frame, right? But those are, there's still a big security thing that we've got to make sure as well. I mean, that's obviously paramount when you're talking about more edge, more nodes, right? There's more threat planes, more risk planes, and now you're talking APIs. So we've got to be very, very cognizant of that as we think about that going forward, both from our customer perspective, the enterprise, and the ecosystem and totality.
Yeah, and that sort of brings the other issue, like edge computing. So edge is important for performance issues, but also for security, because it's a way to isolate the network. How much of a concern do you see from the enterprise in terms of, do they really want, do they want everything in the cloud, which might make it easier for them to manage it, or do they want more on-prem so that it's more, you can isolate?
Yes.
Yes to both.
Yes.
You want both.
Both. The answer is yes to both. I mean, I think you're seeing a mix. I mean, I think all of them are trying to figure out, what amount of compute do I need at what points? Is it device edge? Is it near edge, building edge? Is it, some, regional edge? Is it all of the above is probably the right answer in terms of where they have to have it. As they start pushing the parameters of the application and start, especially multi-sites, right? When you have multi-sites, large workforces, big supply chains, and all these different things, the edge should move with you, right? As you go from site to site to site. And it's happening. I think what we've tried to really do is to foster that distributed compute ideation is be very thoughtful about keeping the network as flat as possible, right? At least in our story and our customer conversation, it's flatter. Here's what it looks like: hyper edge, near edge, central edge, cloud, right? And here's how you get there. To your point, as we've done that, we've started to see, okay, here are the opportunities, and you've seen this with our recent security PR and launches coming out that we're now inserting. We've got a good path on that flat network plane. Our security folks are saying, yep, we see the opportunities. They're inserting their security functions in the right places to pick up the next level of slack, taking input on ideation to go up, so that again, we help the customers feel comfortable to then say, I'm going to cut this service that was in Azure, bring it down a little bit, move a little out, or really get into, you think about AR and all these things. They really need that distributed content thing. A lot of those applications are still all just on the device, right? Mm-hmm. The more they can distribute content and decision-making, the more, immersive it becomes as you move down the street, right? Because it's following you, right? The cloud's following you. But that takes some coordination, and it takes some, trust in what they have from a KPI perspective. And that's where we're trying to just get those layers logically, at least logically thought out from a framework perspective, story perspective, so that the innovation and innovators at the application levels, we collaborate to get to where we think Goldilocks will be, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Yeah. So now when we talk about the cloud, there is all the hyperscaler that's you guys have been working with on one hand, but they're also becoming more and more, I say, involved. So they, into the wireless space. So, so in the same way that you're moving more towards, in general, enterprise services, the hyperscaler are more clearly moving into wireless. And, you're working with them, but could they also be, they're also going to be more of a competition. How do you see the relationship evolving there?
I think anytime you're working in an ecosystem type of environment, there's going to be blurry lines where the two organizations begin to meet, right? And any ecosystem, there's likely the best ecosystems have overlap between products in some form or fashion, because they know enough about where you end that they kind of blur their lines to meet you there, right? So that hopefully that ecosystem puzzle piece could go branch to another one, right, and continue that concentric overlapping circles, just like cell sites, right? So yes, there will be partners, they will be competitors, and the changes, everything's in software is a good thing, everything's in software is a bad thing, and it makes opportunities to go do things differently. And it forces us to change, right, in terms of how we approach it. It allows them to change in terms of how they approach. I think that's all beneficial for the enterprise, right? The hard part for the enterprise is what is right? And it's there's really not a wrong answer anymore, but it's what is optimal. And I think that's the part we owe to our customers, to make sure that, we're not quick to we see it every day, so we know what the products are. They need the journey so they can understand why the products are, and then they can make that decision in context of their world and where they need to go. And that's again, the hard part in this new world is it's a lot of overlap. And that's a good thing. It's hard for customers is a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess that, there is, it's new technology, more complexity, but more things you can do with it. So there's no free lunch, but, there's a lot of opportunity. Now we have a question from Murat. He's asking, when shared spectrum, for instance, CBRS, is used for a white-collar enterprise to provide a network environment which supports both private and public use, what would be the preference of tier one carriers? Will they be interested in managing it end-to-end, or more inclined to partner, or to be more of a customer or third-party managed system service provider? So I guess it's the question that if you want to do CBRS in an enterprise, do you want to run it, or do you want to release it, or you don't?
We can do both, right? But I think this question has broader implications and I think you're going to see customers that will want to run it themselves or have an operator. And the key word I pick up on, which kind of identifies the site type, is white collar, right? That typically has been a little more toward, hey, we don't want to put a DAS in anymore. We want CBRS to be the prime cellular spectrum to work with, and it's possible, right? But if you're doing that, you're probably thinking, how do I not take and give my users the ability to bring their whatever device they have and move in and out? And from our perspective, then we're working the ways to make that possible. Now, when you're talking about managing end to end, we could manage our portion and maybe the rest of the portion for where it ends for us. And then obviously we're not going to touch the other operators' stuff, right? But they may want to tie into that as well. A lot of options here. It's still kind of dust settling on, what's the optimal architecture even before we think about the support models that run behind it. And that's a good thing. I think we're seeing some early promising results in testing, but there's still a long way to go in terms of what's going to be the right opportunity for our customers going forward.
Yeah, and so
probably didn't give you the answer you're looking for, but
yeah. Well, sort of close to this is the issue of DAS. I mean, in the US, we had a lot of DAS deployments, which, way more than any other country. Is it going to now change, and are you going to move to different architectures, or is DAS going to see? Because DAS is also evolving, so there's a huge.
So some of it's going to be, you'll see some DAS still. You'll see other alternatives come in that'll be maybe layer 3 type opportunities. You'll see there's different things coming out from the big OEMs in the space that try to streamline the process and implementation, right? So there's going to be new options, new opportunities that'll arise that'll help both from what we have to deploy as an operator and whoever the DAS deployment is too, right? Because it's not, I can go deploy the DAS, but I still have to bring another piece, which is the RF, and that's in every case. So it's, what do those options look like in context of the size of the site, right? Because some of the things you say around more plug and play layer 3 type of things won't be quite what the enterprise would need from a scope perspective, and a big site, right? But as you look at small office type sites, the types of places that I think Murat's question was kind of leaning toward, there could be both a technical and an operational feasibility to do so. So it's but we'll look at the architectures and get there appropriately.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about. We haven't talked about. I mentioned Open RAN. This is remarkable because that's a hot topic of the day. But I don't want to ask you so much about Open RAN. But in terms of when you have a network that is more disaggregated, where you have many more vendors, people can say that it's all interoperable, but clearly as an operator, you have more of a bigger role in terms of managing all of this. So if something breaks down, you don't call the equipment vendor, you have to sort it out, whose fault it is, how to fix things. So, and things do break down all the time anyway, so it's there's nothing to do with the multi-vendor or whatever. So, how is that changing, and or is it changing anything, or how do you deal with this type of the new challenges of the disaggregated network?
There's more of it, but there's more ways to manage it too. Right? There's more automation built into it. So I think my feeble brain, there's more automation, there's more risk, and I think both of them are moving parallel, right? And the operators are all thinking that way because of just the history of the types of things we have to be cautious of and cognizant of, right, from a data management. So very cognizant and being very aware of, yes, we can do more things for ecosystem, open, APIs, all these things, but while you're doing that, make sure you're conscious of the safety and security of the data that we've, long been stood by, right, in terms of as operators, right? Now, I'm not saying security threats can't happen and will, but I think everybody's being very thoughtful at the same time, right? As if I do X, what are the implications? Because it's not, you don't want that to happen for our customers, right? Enterprises or consumers. So I think you'll see very pragmatic approaches to that as we continue to enhance the ecosystem, APIs, ORAN, and the like, right? And be very, and with both eyes open to hopefully make sure we head off and mitigate as much risk as possible.
Yeah. Okay, so we're at the end of the hour. So Jason, thank you so much for sharing so much. It was great to hear you, and you shared a lot of information with all of us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, Kendra, back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Monica. Thank you to Jason for that wonderful conversation. And thanks to the audience for some great questions in there. So this webinar will be available on the senzafili.com website in the coming days, and a link to that will also be emailed to registrants. And we also have 3 upcoming Sparring Partners webinars in December. The first one will be on December 2nd about managing identity in digital and physical worlds. The second one will be December 9th about crowdsourcing for network planning. And the third will be December 15th on the future of spectrum policy. And the registration for those will all be available on the senzafili.com website in the coming days. Thanks again to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.